Hello and welcome to this episode of Pause with Nandini on NRI Affairs. In a way, the entire act of theatre making is a way of traveling to another reality, only to reveal what we really are deep inside, says Abhishek Majumdar, a playwright, essayist, scenographer, and director working in India and internationally. His work has been produced and commissioned in leading theatres of the world, including Royal Court Theatre London, Prithvi Mumbai, Ranga Shankara Bangalore, and lots of unpronounceable names, but all across the world. He's been in Paris and London, in Buenos Aires, in San Francisco, New York, and I'm sure much more. He's also a recipient of multiple awards, including the Meta Award for Best Play and Best Script, International Theatre Makers Award, New York, the Shankar Nag Rangakarni Award in Bangalore, the Toto Funds, the Arts Award, and many, many more. This is going to take very long if I go into everything that he's accomplished. But suffice to say, he's written a new book. Well, a new book has come out, which is a collection of his plays. And this has been published by Bloomsbury. It's called Abhishek Majumdar Collected Plays. He's also written another book of essays previously, which is called Theatre Across Borders, which is also published by Bloomsbury International. And perhaps he'll talk a little bit about both. But today I'm here to talk about the new book and delve a little bit deeper into the world of a playwright. It is an unusual thing in today's time, but I want to know a little bit more what makes, what makes this world exciting for him. And hopefully, you'll go out and buy the book and there'll be a whole range of new people reading your new book. Thank you and welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Nandini. Thank you. I'm really grateful to you for doing this. And I've been looking forward to speaking to you for a while and very happy to be here.
I'm glad we could connect. And before I go further, I do want to say that I have known Abhishek in a bit of a different avatar, which is when COVID was on and there were lots of volunteer teams and groups in India. I know he was very deeply involved as well. And for me, it was very interesting to see how many people, of course, there were people from all over, but particularly a lot of people from the creative fields actually were rolling up their sleeves and getting involved. And to me, that just presents another aspect of an interest really in humanity and what's happening in the world and engaging in the environment that we're in. So we'll talk a little bit about a lot of things about him and his work, but I want to give a little bit of a background of this particular book. So it features 5 plays. There's Dweep, there's Pala, there's Jinns of Eidgah, Mukti Dham, and 9 Kinds of Silence. So each has been performed at different times in different parts of the world, and each belongs to different worlds. So the Jinns of Eidgah is predominantly about the politics of Kashmir. Pala is Tibet, the politics of Tibet, the island, the politics of the environment. Mukti Dham is the politics of perhaps Hindutva, to say it simplistically, but a bit more than that, I think. And 9 Kinds of Silence is the politics of war. So I want to say I was a little bit intrigued and a little bit unsure reading a book of plays because it's not normally what I would read. And I think the last time I engaged deeply in plays was Shakespeare, which we had part of, literary text. So long time ago. So first off, talk to me about being a playwright and how this book came about.
Yeah, I think being a playwright has been one of the things that I have been for the longest time. In between, I have also become a teacher and a scenographer and other things. But playwriting has been a real passion for me for a very long time. I started off as a writer of short stories, and I still write short stories. But most of the work that I produce is, from playwriting. Sometimes they're my own plays, sometimes they're plays written by other people. I work with a lot of other writers as well to develop new plays. And I just find it fascinating as a process. I always enjoyed the theater as a child growing up. we had a lot of theater around us, different kinds of things. The Bengali theater was one theater, which was sort of often either classics or more contemporary, left-leaning, Badal Sarkar type theater. We also had a lot of Ram Leela around us. I grew up in Delhi, so there was a lot of Ram Leela, and there was very little English theater. But it was very interesting for me. So being a playwright has been a lot of fun because it's a kind of mix of uh, literature, mathematics, and sport. I think that would be a way of looking at it, because you are creating an event. It has to be structurally absolutely sound. So it's very mathematical, actually, and which is also one of my great loves. And of course, it's literature. So it's been fabulous to be able to engage in that for so many years. And the book was, in a way, long coming, because these plays, at least the English plays, there are 3 English plays in it: Pala and Gins of Idga and Nine Kinds of Silence. And some of my other English plays, they have been published on their own, individually. And the Hindi plays have been published in Hindi. Dvipa is in Bangla, and Muktidham is originally in Hindi. So it's also a collection which has 3 English plays, one translated from Bengali, one translated from Hindi. But these plays were not together in one place. So I'm really thrilled that Bloomsbury decided to do this book, where they brought together a collection, and I think they've selected an interesting bunch of plays, because it moves across themes, but I'm glad they picked plays which are also non-English in translation to include in that, because that is also a very big part of my life. So yeah, I'm really excited about this book. And the other book you mentioned, Theatre Across Borders, which came before this, which was published this February, it was out in India, but since last October, it's been out everywhere else. That has a lot of essays about theatre making around the world. So in a way, this book is also, in good time, because some of the plays that book talks about, the making of the plays that book talks about, are actually in this book. So I'm not sure if it should have been the other way around, but somehow this is how it has happened. So yeah, I'm really glad that this book is here finally.
Like a companion book to that, isn't it? It's almost like one's the theory and one's the actual fruit of all of that work.
Yes.
Yeah.
I
wanted to, in the foreword, you're quoted as saying that all the in-depth interviews you did leading to you putting this work together are not merely to gather information that goes into the play. One of the interesting things is each of your plays are so diverse that even a casual, quick reading will tell you that they would have entailed a lot of research, right? You say something quite interesting, which is, what I'm looking for is not information, I'm looking for shared presence. And shared presence, when we talk about spaces like Kashmir or Tibetans in exile, that shared presence has a very different perspective depending on where you're coming from. So I would love to know a little bit about what that information gathering and sharing presence, what that process was like that then led to these.
I mean, yeah, that's a really interesting question. Also, to unpack that sentence, I think is a useful exercise. I think information is by and large part of a lot of secondary research. One gets there has been a lot that has been written about Kashmir, about Tibet, about the ecology, and all of this. So that's obviously a major part of any research for a play, is to read all this, kind of syllabus. I always create a syllabus before, entering a play, and then I narrow the syllabus after one read, and then, it's like doing an MPhil. That's
think you
each
just
each
like
place.
studying. All this is an
I
excuse.
really
You
like
just
studying.
like to
Yeah.
study.
Yes. So it's a bit like an MPhil, but at the end of it, you don't have a thesis, you have a play. That's my joy of being in the theater. So what happens is that is there, but the theater or cinema, any of these mediums which are audio visual, a lot is said, like in human life, by how a person is somewhere, rather than what are they actually saying, because we all speak within a context. And an interview is also a very specific context. And these interviews are not interviews that happen in one go because they are meant for creative work. They come out of friendships. So it's
Mm.
not like you meet somebody and you say, okay, now I want your story. It's like we've spent years together sometimes, before we can actually remotely get to the story that we are not telling everybody. Like what are the fault lines of our narratives is, I think, what makes the arts an important uh, presence in the world. Because often the newspaper
Mm.
or any other kinds of media, they can present what happened, but it's difficult for us to uh, understand motivations when actions don't add up. you know so like in real life, we often say to each other, oh, I'm meeting you after so many years, you've changed. Like, this seems to be something that bothers us a lot as human beings, that someone is not behaving the way we expected them to behave.
Mm.
But the world is full of that. And I
Mm.
think all art, literature and painting, poetry, and you are a poet. So, and I do read a lot of your poetry, by the way. So I just wanted to say that. And I love reading your work.
Mm.
Uh, so, like when you're writing a poem, uh, you are really trying to tell us something that we know, but we don't know. Right. I mean, it's the same with plays. The interviews are meant not just to find out, what is it to be a Tibetan in exile, but what is the dream of this person? What's their nightmare?
Mm.
What is the doubt about the dream
Mm.
that they have? You know,
Mm.
Now those are the things that when somebody goes from being a subject in a kind of sociological research to being a character in a play. That's the journey from stating the obvious to going deeper into it. So I think that's basically what a lot of the shared presence is like. Just spending time together, sitting down, having time is a very important part of, I think, this kind of work. Yeah, and I think it comes from that. That's really a very big part of the research that I was referring to, and that is very hard to capture.
Mm.
Uh, it's very hard to give any other document about it.
I found
Yeah.
it interesting because also somewhere I think in the forward I read something about making the invisible visible in ways. So, there's all of this invisible connection that has been formed and that is alive, that then informs the work. And the work is a small part of a much
Mm.
larger universe of engagement that you have
Mm.
and I think that's a very profound way to think about creating art, because it's not just the work, it's all of this
Mm.
sort of a universe that has preceded it and that it has
Mm.
come out of. So that was interesting. Before I talk specifically about the work, one of the ideas, of course, I did want to explore is about the relationship of a play between text and performance, and
Mm.
also the relationship of the playwright with
Mm.
different interpretations of their work.
Mm.
And it seems to me the most sort of Buddhist of all literary pursuits, and how it sort of necessitates a non-attachment to your work because it's going to be interpreted in so many different ways. So how do you
Mm.
navigate that? And do you feel quite comfortable with that idea?
Uh, wow, these are all such great questions. Um, Firstly, I have to say that I'm really glad that you are bringing up so many things from the forward, That's actually written by Sundar Sarukai, who's a philosopher and somebody I have really looked up to for, and I'm really grateful to Sundar for writing the foreword. And it really goes to show how much thought he has given to it, that it is leading to so many interesting questions. So both you as a reader and Sundar as a writer, I think you must meet each other, is what I'm trying. In terms of theater, like I said, is an event, so people interpret it differently. People go through different uh, stagings, events. They create different events out of the same thing. Just to give an example, next week there's a series of shows of Mukti Dham in Jaipur. But the director has decided to do it in an immersive theater format, where there's a room which is completely converted into the space. There are going to be only 30 people in the show at one point of time, and they have 9 shows in 3 days, which is completely different from the way we had directed it, or others have directed that show, which is a proscenium style play. So this kind of interpretation is something I find very interesting, because I also trust this director's intention. He's trying to find something in this map called the play, which as a director, I wouldn't find. So ultimately, a play is, making a play is also an act of cartography. It's like creating a map and handing it over and saying, okay, you go where you want to go inside this. And that's part of the joy of it. And when they translate, oh my God, like it's just something else. When someone translates to another language and you see it, like Pala in Tibetan is so different from Pala in English. Is something I've been fortunate to see it. But one has to be also careful of this. I think, like non-attachment and irresponsibility. There's like a thin line between the two. Sometimes what happens is that, like people want to do Jinns of Eidgah and they will say, okay, I want to do this play, I like this play, but I don't want to set it in Kashmir because it's about humanity, and I never allow that. I say, no, it is about Kashmir. If you are interested in another story about a set of siblings in general, going through strife, then choose another play or write your own. But as far as I am concerned, it's very, very clearly a play. No matter what else it's about, it's definitely about Kashmir. It is written out of the lives of Kashmiris and their interviews and so on and so forth. It can't be taken for something else, is my point of view. Some other playwright might have a different view on that. But I think this is, one can tell when an interpretation is because one wants to go further, and when an interpretation is when one wants to play safe. And I don't think the theater is a place to play safe. I think it's completely pointless. Like safe theater is meaningless. It's like, it's like playing cricket with jelly instead of a cricket. It has no meaning, safe theater. So, like I don't mind. I always, whenever people sign, do my plays, I tell them that you can edit whatever you want. I have no question. You can remove anything. But if you add a line, you have to take permission for it. Because that's not something I've said. So I don't mind you removing half my play. That's fine. Because sometimes, the non-verbal can be more exciting for a director than the verbal. They're interested in the event more than what my characters are saying. That's absolutely fine. But to add lines is very dodgy. Because I've seen, like, there are nightmares of that every playwright has had, to go and watch, sit in and go, what was that about? And so,
Interesting. No, that's it's, I think it's an important perspective, the line between responsibility and pushing the narrative forward and taking creative liberties. I did want to, so the first play, obviously the one that I read was Dweep, and I found that the most abstract of all the plays. And when I read that, I was like, okay, I'm in for a ride now, because this one is quite sort of mind-bending in the way you've played around with so many ideas. And the subversion of the traditional male and female, master, slave, dominance and subversion and all of those things. And I find it interesting how the sort of the human experience also speaks so closely to the environmental
Mm.
experience, right, and what is happening to the environment. And you say we must never forget that man is on top of the turtle. The turtle is not on top of the man, right? That's a line from there. And it's sort of ironically said, I suppose, in the way that, this idea of who controls the narrative and therefore who controls what is to happen and what really the actions that result from a particular kind of thinking. And then how the woman says to man, it's just woman, man, right? So
Mm.
she says, you're selfish, that's who you are, but that's not all. You're a cruel and dangerous animal. And then he says, your cruelty is wrapped around memories. And then she says, you have an infinite power to forget. You often forget that you're not really yourself. And then Male says, you're an inventor, you've invented God. You've invented religion, you've invented science, happiness, hope, war, color, race, knowledge. Mukshuddhi, Alpona, and even funerals now face the consequences. Another interesting line, how do you find those who want to get lost? So there's so many ideas in this play that I think this deserves its own talk. But I did want to kind of touch upon one of the things that you said, that you're interested in environmental economics, right? And how did that lead you to this play? That's question one. And the second thing was that how do you find the politics of the environment and the politics of gender have any commonalities at all?
Oh, great question. Yeah. Um, I have been interested in environmentalism for a very long time, since my college days. Environmental economics just happened to be one thing that I was about to study just before I moved to drama school. So it's a subset of my interest in environmentalism. That's interesting. I think what I'm really drawn towards is the study of thinking about ourselves in the environment. I mean, there are very, very simply, there are two ways of looking at it. One is that there's me and there's the environment. And the other model is to think that I am inside this. So it's not a separate thing. So, like, in the human perspective, we could say that we are having this Zoom call and then we are going to switch off and we are going to meet in a park. And that's when we'll do something environmental. But if there were any two other animals who were doing anything, we would think that whatever they do is an environmental thing. It's
Yes.
not something, even if like a chimpanzee was using a tool to cut a fruit or break a branch, we would not think that moment of using a tool as being outside of the environment. Right? And I think fundamentally this is the divide at a very basic foundational sense of where we are, what we are, how do we behave. Are we supposed to think of ourselves as natural beings? And what does that mean? Versus are we supposed to think of ourselves as beings of concepts, which is essentially what we do in school. We teach our children in a day, we divide the day into 7 or 8 classes of concepts. And we say that, okay, this is trigonometry and this is a kind of different thing to studying Shakespeare. And, but I don't know if this is right. Maybe this isn't, and there is a lot of argument against this view as well. And obviously that leads us to this, strange paradox where we are unable to imagine any relevance of environmentalism outside of an apocalypse. It's a baffling thing that we need the world to end in our minds. Like we need that as the fear to think of ourselves as part of it, which is insane, right? If one thinks about it, like I don't think any other animal can have this conception. We don't have this conception in our day-to-day life. We don't bring up our children or get a burger at a restaurant thinking about our death. We live because we are living. The fear of death does not make us live. But somehow when it comes to the environment, we think, all these are kind of serious hobbies, how to protect the turtle, how to plant a tree, I mean, these kind of things.
Mm.
Uh, so that is something I was very intrigued by.
Mm.
Uh, I think it started with the moment when I was in college. There was a big moment of, protest against dams, big dams in India, which I was very interested in, what that was all about. And many of these environmental, what do you say, things that are considered to be absolutely kosher in the world of development or in the world
Yes.
of environment, they change every 5 years. It
Mm.
completely now there is no question of building a big dam in India.
Mm.
It's a no-go. But people died trying to stop the last big dams. So it's just these concepts keep changing and validating or invalidating the way people live. And Dvipa for me was a very, very important play because I mean I'm Bengali, so I've spent a lot of time in coastal places and so on and so forth. And also Bengali literature is so full of environmentalism, like Bibhuti Bhushan, who's one of
Mm.
my favorite writers. Half his books are about nature, and everything is important. The bird is important, the plant is everything is important. It's just a very specific, expansive worldview. But at one point of time, I was going to many these climate change conferences
Mm.
around the world, uh, and which itself is a bizarre thing that happened for about 10 years in our world, I think, uh, where more or less every conference would be about what will happen if London drowns, or Bombay drowns, or New York drowns, when I know my friends in Sundarban whose islands have already drowned.
I
So
was
it's not,
thinking of that. When I was reading it,
yeah,
I was thinking of the Sundarbans. So,
exactly. So
yes.
this is actually in my head set in the Sundarbans.
Yes, even
So
in mine.
it's that word. Yeah. You see, like that's the thing. You talk to fishermen, you stand next to uh, in Calcutta, you talk to a fisherman who comes back at 5 o'clock in the morning, who
Mm.
leaves to catch fish and comes back at 5, and they will tell you exactly what's going on in the ocean. Uh, there are fishermen I have met who have been in jails in Sri Lanka from Tamil Nadu. They've been in jails in Sri Lanka for several years, and now they've been released. Who actually had crossed the nautical line, of course, which is not a real line, uh, to catch fish, which has moved further in. A fish
Mm.
that could be caught at, say, 500 meters into the ocean has now
Now,
moved 2.5 kilometers into the ocean because the salinity of water has changed due to the melting of the icebergs. Now, neither the fish nor the iceberg know that if you move 2.5 kilometers inside, you're in Sri Lanka, Sri Lankan water, and you're not in Indian water. But this does happen. People get into Bangladesh's water, into Sri Lanka's water, into on the Pakistan side, because fish has moved inside.
this is the
Uh,
absurdist sort of. I can see how absurd our human, control seems in the face of all of this.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And like what I find obvious but baffling is that nobody who makes a decision about nautical miles is a fisherman. Not a single person who's ever going to decide what should be not
Mm.
the nautical miles is a fisherman. The people who use that concept every day, it decides their life, death, separation from family, going to prison, everything. They have no say in what the line is, and the line is unmovable. But
Mm.
there is no line. I mean, there just simply is no line. So I think it came from these concepts where I was also trying to compare very, very interesting European ecological frameworks, Guattari and, these two very Bengali philosophers who have thought about the environment in different ways,
Mm.
and trying to see what happens when you have this complete like folk tradition which looks at, like, you go into Sundarbans, you pray to Bon Bibi and then you enter. Now, where does this stand in relation to a world which is waiting for an apocalypse? to
Pay
end,
attention.
to pay attention. And
Hmm.
now what is happening in Sundarban is even more interesting, I think. I mean, not interesting, um, but of worth studying, definitely, and worth protecting. Is that there is a rich culture in Sundarban of Hindus and Muslims living together and creating folk stories where they are neither Hindus nor Muslims. It's like both cultures are present. The tiger is a friend, or if the tiger is an enemy, the protector is Muslim. The songs are Hindu, but they are being broken along those lines. There are attempts being made to desecularize it.
The moment
Hmm.
you said this, my first reaction was like, don't talk about it. Let it stay protected. The
Right,
more
right,
you
right.
tell people in the world, they will
Yeah,
find a way to destroy it because
but they
everything
are destroying
is.
it right now. the the point I'm trying to make is that the desecularization of a performance in Sundarban is
Hmm.
directly connected to not understanding the environmental
Hmm.
ways of living in Sundarban. This mix of religion did not come from a mosque or a temple. It came because of the ocean. It came
People
because
want to
people
be
went to
together.
catch fish together.
Hmm.
Like that's where it comes from. It does not come from a Qazi or a priest or a Pandit or anything like that.
Hmm.
So I think this is one example of how actually our behavior is deeply connected to the environment. I think, especially in
Right.
cultures which are close to environmental living.
Hmm.
Um,
Oh, that's very interesting. It is. And maybe you can talk a little bit about, if you feel like touching upon, why you brought in the play of gender
hmm.
in Dvipa.
Yeah, I mean, gender is very fluid. If you see uh, folk performance, it's a really fluid concept. Men have been playing women for ages. There are women who are in Bengal, particularly. All the powerful characters are women. You know, which is not to say that there hasn't been subjugation of women in Bengal. I mean, oh my God, there has been. But there also has been the creation of myth after myth, folk after, folk story after folk story, where women are the most powerful. I mean, the biggest festival we have is worshipping a goddess.
Yeah.
So in that world, the concept of a kind of masculine environmental god
Hmm.
is alien.
Yes, for
Shiva's
sure.
story remains the same around across the country, the Samudra Manthan and this, that, etc. But it's not the main story in Bengal.
Hmm.
It is a woman's story, which is the main story. Fertility is not seen as a powerless thing to protect by men. It is considered to be a powerful aspect of human life. Uh, what is really funny nowadays? I hear a lot of stand-up comics, and there are at least two or three who I have heard who say Hindi stand-up comics who say that I met this girl and we were there for an arranged marriage, whatever, and then I asked her, "Do you cook?" And she got offended, and I said, "My God, I didn't know what else to say, so I asked this. It's not that I wanted to cook every day." And then she went back. Thank God that girl was not Bengali, because if she was Bengali, she would have also written a blog. Other like in popular culture, it's a real fear of this Bengali woman who's going to go home and write a blog. Like a Bengali woman writing a blog is not even the tip of the iceberg of what can happen if you mess this up, right? So I'm just thinking that and it's not an urban phenomena. You see it in villages, you see it in definitely in folk stories. So I think the rigidity of gender in performance and in life uh, is also a kind of uh, is not a local tradition. It's an
Hmm.
import
Hmm.
uh, outside, uh, and I don't. I
Organically, it doesn't work like that. Hmm.
It doesn't work, and it doesn't work in many traditions. It just simply is not true for all the traditions of the world. A lot of Eastern tradition doesn't have that actually. It's not some new radical thing. It just is like that.
So lovely. Now I want to move on to Tibetans in exile, Pala. I'm going to read a little bit, couple of lines that stayed with me to kind of talk about some of the ideas in the play. So Tsering says, it's used like Mandarin. You cannot use every language the same way, Pema. You lose your language, you lose who you are, what you are, and most importantly, why you are. And then it goes on to say, your mind is in Mandarin and you're just using Tibetan sounding words. And further down through the play, Tsering says, fighting for freedom is not violence. Misleading people is. So a lot of ideas of identity, language, what it means to be Tibetan, what it means to hold on to that, and also what is, this is everybody has one of those things, I think, that questions that don't leave, and maybe for you this freedom, violence, non-violence, all of this is a big khichdi, isn't it? Which you explore in different ways, in different thoughts. So, but I want to talk a little bit in the context of this play about identity and language. And what were your thoughts while you were writing this?
Yeah, I mean, Pala is set in Tibet. It is not about Tibetans in exile. It is about Tibetans who are not in exile, who are very much inside Tibet and who are faced with this set of very difficult choices. They would want freedom, but His Holiness the Dalai Lama has said long ago that we are no longer fighting for freedom. We are fighting for a kind of autonomy, a genuine autonomy.
The middle path.
The middle path, yes, absolutely. The middle path, which is the kind of genuine autonomy from, which is also actually what the 13th Dalai Lama had proposed. In fact, he wanted a greater degree of freedom in his time. And at that time, the Chinese oppression had not yet started. There was the nationalists who were in power at that time. But anyway, that's a different story. What I'm trying to say is that I think at the core of the Tibetan struggle are two ideas. One is Buddhism, and the other is language. Tibetan language, as we know, is a very old and rich language. There are several thousands and thousands of extraordinary works of philosophy which have been written in that language, and which, despite the brunt of the cultural revolution, even what has remained is a very rich part of human legacy. And at the same time, it is also an active language. It's a contemporary language. People speak Tibetan in Tibet, and different kinds of Tibetan, not just one Tibetan, depends on which part of Tibet one is from. I suppose in the same way as Bengali and Tamil and it's not a historic language. It's a language in action. And it's such a profound language. To give you one example, which I'm sure you will see the big idea in that example. I was watching the first show of Pala in Tibetan last year. And I was looking at the subtitles. The subtitles were in English and the show was in Tibetan. And I realized there isn't a single word that they said which was the same as the subtitle. There wasn't they have a word for train, for smoke, for like every single, even nouns, common nouns. There is a word in Tibetan for it, and it's a word in use. It's not like Hindi where if you have to be really strict, you'll say Durbash, but any sensible person will just say telephone. There is a word in Tibetan. That's how active the language is. And I was stunned. It's just alive, and it has new words. And there are new books being written in Tibetan, new books of philosophy all the time. But of course, what has happened is that the Chinese oppression on Tibet and the general picture of the world is such that people think of it like it's like preserving some kind of tradition, as if it's not a contemporary life one is preserving. And
Mm-hmm.
so one of the things they have systematically done in China is that they've changed the education in Tibet. What Macaulay did in India, it's the same thing that they did, uh, which is that earlier in school everything was taught in Tibetan, and if one studied Mandarin, then Mandarin was taught in Mandarin. But now it's the reverse. Everything is in Mandarin. If you study Tibetan, Tibetan is in Tibetan. Right? So a lot of people want their children to leave because of this. They want to preserve the language, not just for the sake of, nostalgia, but because there are profound thoughts, culture, civilization which exists in that language, which I don't think is very easily translatable. And why should one have to translate one's own language forcibly, right? So it's very, very connected to language, I think. I also think that freedom is enormously connected as a concept to the concept of what language can we describe that freedom in. I mean, in India, if we did not have the word Swaraj,
Mm.
which is a word that does not mean democracy, that does not mean communism, that does not mean a capitalism, it just literally means self-rule.
Rule. We've grown
You
up
know,
knowing.
and it will decide what that Swaraj entails is my business later on with my people. But first of all, I want Swaraj. There is no argument about whether the British are good for India, bad for India, whether your railway tracks were very useful, whether whatever it is. Swaraj is an absolute principle.
Mm.
Which even when someone like Ambedkar, he refutes Gandhi,
Mm.
but there's no argument about the word Swaraj. In fact, Ambedkar's point of Swaraj is, I mean, he doesn't say the word Swaraj, but what he entails is even more. Swaraj means even for those who are oppressed in the caste system, they should have their own rule. So that hence he's asking for electorates
Mm.
for, Dalit and other minorities. So, like the word Swaraj exists, in Tibetan language also, there are words which exist on its own. And just because somebody starts to teach people Mandarin, it doesn't mean that those concepts go away in one generation or two generations, but eventually you start thinking differently. You know, you I think we are products of our language. Uh, there is so much language right now about, I don't feel this, I have to have this, I need this, whatever, both in terms of need, greed, and care. In all three categories, not both, but all three categories. But it's coming from popular culture. Uh, Popular culture is full of references to the individual being at the center of everything, even in good ways. That I need to draw my boundary and I need to, you know, uh,
Self-care, boundaries.
yes, which is which is fantastic, but it is the shift in language, and I
Yes.
think the the like I have this, just to end this long winding answer. There is a friend of mine. She's a playwright from Mozambique. Her name is Selma Costa. She's an incredible playwright. She was saying one day that her grandmother said to her that Selma, no matter what came to us on a boat, remember that feminism didn't come to Mozambique on a boat. We have our own. It has other words, and I think that's a very big
Mm.
language that we have words and concepts in our own languages which can negotiate and deal with other languages. They don't have to be drowned by other languages, which I think is a very big part of the Tibetan story. I think any oppressor in today's world knows that whoever has to be oppressed, their language has to be decimated. as long as they have that language, it'll be difficult to occupy.
Because you don't occupy only a land, you occupy an identity. And to occupy an identity, you have to occupy that language with yours. It's almost
Absolutely.
parasitic in that way, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah. Yes, absolutely. I agree. Yeah.
It's interesting. No, I'm asking long-winded questions and you're giving long-winded answers. And that just is the format of this talk. So that's fine.
Yeah.
Obviously I found that you have presented an alternate viewpoint of the Tibetan resistance, where now in popular imagination it is only associated with non-violence, and that is sort of almost become like an ideal, right? That non-violence, as we talk about Gandhi in the same way, the non-violent resistance of the Tibetan people as decreed by the Dalai Lama. And
Yes.
the fact that there was a prior to that, and there may be an alternate viewpoint even within Tibet
Yeah.
of that is something that it's almost like the wheels of popular narrative are so big and so strong that anything else has gotten decimated. So I found it interesting that, it's almost like weeds grow as much as you may not want them, and you may want a well manicured, non-violent garden. There will always be weeds where there is injustice, right? And
Yeah.
and that conversation, there is something a little bit unfortunate that all other conversations and voices get so easily subsumed by one powerful narrative, and it's true across many resistance cultures and resistance, um, lands.
Yeah.
Of course, Jinns of Eidgah was probably the most moving for me, uh, perhaps closest to home. And I've lived in Kashmir. My father was in the army. Uh, Jammu and Kashmir Light Infantry. He was
Okay.
he was the CO. So
Yes. Which years were you there?
till I was 6. And
So
then
you served those 6 years, is it? Or did
Hmm.
he serve before that?
No, he served. No, he served. He was with Jammu and Kashmir Light Infantry through his tenure.
Okay.
But it's been an arc of discovery and thinking for me, coming from an army background and then being very heavily invested in peace. And what does that mean? And negotiating ideas of peace and violence and self-determination, and all of those thorny things that constitute any such conflict. um, in that, Vani says freedom, Beg Sahib, is perhaps larger than reason, religion, the mind, or medicine. Perhaps it is just pure human instinct. Talking about freedom, right? And then later on, I think Dr. Beg says something very interesting. Everyone wants a hero in their neighbor's house, isn't it? So
Yeah.
that's cost. That's the real human cost of
Yeah.
resistance, where you're
Yeah.
happy to have a hero, and you will felicitate a hero, but in your neighbor's house.
Yeah.
And it was so beautifully captured, the conflict, the dilemma of people caught in that sort of a situation, where there's really it's not a question of a good outcome and a bad outcome. It's really two terrible choices, to either join the resistance or not, or to just deal with the kind of humiliation and the kind of subjugation that any sort of conflict zone like that,
Yeah.
it was very, very, I think that I would love to see performed. I really had such a great urge to see it performed. You've obviously researched a lot on that story. What is it about Kashmir that is kept out of the mainstream narrative that you wanted to shine a light on?
When I started out, I did a trilogy of plays on Kashmir. This is the second part. Jinzo Vidga is the second. The first is a play called Rizwan, and the third is a play called Gasha, which is written by Iravati Karnik. I directed it. When I started out with Rizwan, I worked with a book of poems of Agha Shahid Ali's called Country Without a Post Office. Now, obviously, growing up in Delhi, I had a lot of Kashmiri friends, Pandits and Muslims and this and that, but mostly Pandits who had come from Kashmir. Uh, I kept thinking while I was, ending college and this and that there's something about Kashmir which I just don't know and nobody is telling me. Because it seemed like every week in the newspaper, it would seem like it's the most important thing to solve. But this just never got resolved. This just went on and on for years. And so it was this kind of curiosity, about what is the actual story. There seems to be something incomplete. And of course, one had friends and this and that. So you also kind of start putting faces to concepts, right? This is what happened to this person. Oh, this person left Kashmir at this moment, and that person left Kashmir at this moment. So I wanted to, after doing Rizwan, I wanted to go to Kashmir. And I didn't know what I didn't know. I had no idea what I was looking for. I went there and I lived and I started talking to people and, over a long period of time. It's not one visit, but over multiple visits. And I slowly started to see that we actually don't know anything about Kashmir, really. Like now, even less so. It's just, it's like we are fighting for Kashmir. Most of the times, like people fight for a parking spot. It's like mine or it's yours or it's like whatever. I don't think any government in India, any government, will actually be able to resolve Kashmir in the near future, because any decision they make will be unpopular for such a large set of people. Whether they make a decision on this way or that way of independence or non-independence, whatever. Independence is a very big thing, but I'm saying even more self-determination and this and that, both in India and in Pakistan. I mean, I talk to my friends from Pakistan as well, and it's the same thing over there. That we really never get to hear anything about Kashmir, which is Kashmiri. We only get to know about Kashmir, which is Indian, which is Pakistani, which is China. Now, China has moved into parts of Kashmir, controlling airspace and stuff like that. But there is the life of Kashmiris, and also good people, well-meaning people, find it very difficult to understand that the values and things that one values in a place which has seen 25 years of conflict can be very different from what I value sitting in Delhi, Bombay, Bangalore, New York, wherever. It can be a totally different set of things. To me, that is it. I think whether it's Basharat Peer's book or Mirza Wahid's book or, all these, they are very important documents of what has happened in Kashmir, because they capture Kashmir in a strong way. They capture the story. And, like, I'm just connecting this to also what we were talking about in relation to Tibet, which is that I think the non-violence of Tibet is so powerful because violence is always a choice. The point of talking about violence in that play was to be able to contrast it with the enormous strength that non-violence takes.
Yes.
Which is not to say that Kashmiris are weak. Kashmiris are very strong people. They're very resilient people. I mean, most Kashmiris have not resorted to violence. If all Kashmiris resorted to violence, I don't think we would have been able to do what we are doing in Kashmir right now. Like
Yes,
go to Dal Lake and wear dresses and click pictures. Like that wouldn't happen if Kashmiris. And
yes,
in roads in Delhi for sure, people resort to violence for much less. You get a scratch on your car, somebody's down and is out to fight. And the same person is surprised why Kashmir has turned violent. It's a baffling scale of hypocrisy, right? We are saying that, we feed our children saying that if you don't get a khana kha lo nahi to police aa jayegi. Nobody in India says to their child that, okay, if you have to cross the road, ask the policeman. He will cross the road. This is not the picture of the policeman that we have. But in Kashmir, we want people to trust the army, the police, we want other people to love our soldiers. But I won't leave my child with even the security guard of the place where they live. Even with that security guard, people are casteist and classist and they don't want to. But somehow they want Kashmiris to trust people with AK-47s and, machine guns. And I mean, that's what we don't know about Kashmir, actually. We don't know the Kashmiri stories. And right now in Kashmir, there's a complete media shutdown. Most journalists of any merit are in jail. Most newspapers have been shut down. There are great magazines like The Conveyor, Kashmir Narrator. If you go online, you will see even their archives have been deleted. You can't find even their archives right now online. So that's really unfortunate, I think. And it's not coincidence or bad luck. It's created by people.
this is deliberate erasure, isn't it?
Yes,
We are seeing it, and this
absolutely.
is becoming more and more the playbook, which
Yeah,
is first, remove the media, remove histories, erase identities,
yeah,
take over a place, a consciousness with whatever
yeah.
it is that you want to replace it with. And
Yes.
yes, and it's a very emotive play because the idea and the beauty of this play is that it uses something so pure as sport to draw
Hmm.
such a powerful message about, people want to play sport. And sport can be a ticket to freedom. Sport can be so many things. And
Yeah.
I really recommend, if only for that play, I really think that it's something that should be read. I wanted to talk about Mukti Dham. It's a complex play. It talks of caste, of some of these ideas now we are again hearing about, in the context of Hindutva, about what happened to Buddhism and what
Hmm.
was the intersection of caste and Buddhism and Hinduism, and how did all of that play out? Again, it's one of those things that not too much is known about, deliberately perhaps, not so much is spoken about. But at a time when we are looking at this sort of visionist history, right, by the ruling parties, and this majoritarian flexing is happening, what role do you think that arts can really play in keeping some of those stories alive, especially things like street theater and oral traditions? Because, like we're seeing, there's erasure, right? There is erasure, there is not knowing, there's deliberate suppression, and there is this whole revisionist sort of mindset where whatever suits the political dispensation of that age, those are the stories that will be written and those are the stories that will be known. What role
Hmm.
can the arts play, if at all, any?
Yeah. I mean, I think the what we call arts is, it's a name given to a certain human instinct of understanding the world.
Yes.
That's the thing that we call arts. It's not like I don't think it's the other way around. I think there's no such thing as the arts outside. Like, little children, they once they start babbling, they have a concept of, for a long time they believe that the mother and them are one. And there's a moment at which they start thinking that, okay, now we are two different beings. Uh, it just means that as fundamentally as humans and maybe even as animals, we tell ourselves different stories. And we live by those stories. That's how we understand the world. I mean, the greatest dramatic in human life, I think, is this: the recognition that my mother and I are not the same person, we are different. And then later on in life, someday realizing, no, actually, we are the same. And strangely, we are also the same thing. Like there's no Shakespearean tragedy with a greater plot change than this thing that a 7-month-old baby recognizes. So I think that's just to say that this is fundamental to human life. Whether there is erasure or not erasure or whatever else exists, I don't think the arts are going anywhere. The arts don't compete with uh, dictators. Dictators compete with arts.
I love that.
It's, it is actually the other way around. And part of the thing is that I think we even in today's world, when it comes to hating somebody, we can hate someone for something very simple. But we love people with complex feelings, right? And most of the times when we go to vote, when we bring our identities to, even sports matches, we hear so many times that in a stadium there was a fight between people who were wearing X jersey versus people who were wearing Y jersey. It's completely insane. Like grown-ups going there and then identifying the jersey. But it's so common that happened. The security in stadiums is so high.
Because
It's like
yes.
Because of that. Because the moment you give people identity, it's a thing. And we teach children this thing in school. You are from the blue house, the green house, you have to wear this and you have to sing that song. And, like we fill us with rituals of
separation. We keep emphasizing separation at every stage.
Yeah. Because it's simple. I think it's also simpler to, I mean, I don't know what would happen if somebody grew up with no sense of belonging. I don't know if that would be confusing because I don't come from a place where there's no sense of belonging. Of course, I feel like I belong to a lot of things. I feel very proud of the cricket team and East Bengal, Mohun Bagan. Like there are a lot of things I identify with, but I don't necessarily think all of those are bad things. But definitely to make that the point of something is part of what you compete with when you are supposed to hate someone.
Yes.
And the arts are more complex. Like if somebody watches a film on the Russian Revolution, it will be infinitely more complex than reading the pamphlet on the Russian Revolution. If somebody reads my experiments with truth, they will have a far more complex notion of what was going on than by reading something about Gandhi's freedom struggle, or listening to Ambedkar talk about Gandhi brings another perspective to this sort of thing. And which is why I think all religions are basically arts. All of them have a story. The problem is when that story becomes prescriptive.
Yes.
That, okay, if you believe in this story, now you must not eat this, you must not wear that, you must not, you must wake up at this time, whatever that is. So yeah, I think the arts are here to stay, and their role is to make human life celebrate its complexity. I think that's here to stay.
Very well put. I think that's true. Final question. I hope you're not too tired by this onslaught of questions that are coming your way. So I find sort of, because I read them, I think one after the other, I did perhaps, correctly or not, find certain thematic similarities in certain things that seem to come over and over again. Like in Pala, you speak of the people in between, right? And then the non-violence of the Dalai Lama or fighting for freedom. In the other one, the jinns represent the in-between people. Where do I begin my faith? Should I heal my children or fight their war? Where do I begin my faith? In Mukti Dham, Agnivesh says, there are two churas who are sacrificing their religion to become Buddhists. Even now, they hold the knife of animosity in one hand and the urn of non-violence in the other. So the question of this in-between people stuck between two ideologies, choices, two maybe ways of being. I find this, within you as well in some aspects, because, you've got the science head and the mathematics and the environmental economics and all of that. And then you've got this deep humanism and this interest in Buddhism. And you tend to instinctively understand the unifying essence of all creation, right? Whether you're writing about people or whether you're writing about the environment, these questions seem to come up. So I don't know if this is the right way to frame it, but do you find a way that, at least in our lifetime, there will be some progress in the way the world is moving in unifying or integrating all of these polarities? And perhaps then the next generation, you've got a 9-year-old, I've got a 10-year-old and a 15-year-old. What then is the world that they're going to inherit?
Yeah. It's a great question again. I think, I'm not sure if I desire for unification of polarities. What I really hope is that in the way we educate our children, the way we deal with our own lives, that in the future, we are able to give less importance to grand narratives and understand that the world is full of small narratives. It is a collection of multiple narratives, small narratives, which are very important for every person who's inside it. I mean, we are on an extremely average planet in an average galaxy, like the cliche of how average we are is everywhere. Inside that, to think that my narrative is the thing which is going on, like, God created me, is a bafflingly egotistical position, I think. So this notion that, the Tibetan story is like this small thing that was going on while the big Second World War was going on, or the most important thing that happened to Japan is actually Hiroshima and Nagasaki and not the Kyoto School, which came up with some of the most profound philosophical ideas of the world. This denying of narratives and teaching children things like, history. Okay, so there's American history, there is British history, there's Indian history, and then only teaching basically imperial history. What is India is this dynasty, that dynasty, Phalana dynasty, whatever. There's no history in schools. They don't teach the history of peasant revolutions and, agriculture, which is present. It's research that exists in the world. It's not even something that one has to do. It is just really needs to be brought into the books so that the next generation, I hope, my deepest desire is that they think of the world as multiple cultures, multiple polarities, which do not need unification and absolutely do not need to have a hierarchy. Yeah, I think the grand narrative is the false turn we have taken somewhere. That's what I think.
What an interesting way to talk about it. And I expected no less from the celebrated playwright. Thank you so much. It's been absolutely wonderful. Again, for those listening and watching, it's Abhishek Majumdar's collected plays, available at the usual stops.
It's on Amazon, but it's also in all the local Barnes and Nobles. Basically, you can just look for it online. It's available through Bloomsbury. Yeah, it's available in all major books, Waterstones, everywhere.
And are there any performances coming up that maybe we can tag on to this when we put this out? We might put out where people can actually catch some of these performances?
Yes, actually, I think out of the plays that are inside this book, there is Mukti Dham happening in Jaipur in a few days already. There is Kaumudi, which is not in this, but it's also one of the plays of this time, which opens on 25th in Bombay, and then it will continue to play. There are so many shows, you know. There's a
And
Tibetan in, yeah.
can Australia look forward to seeing some of these plays performed here?
I hope so. You know, last year in Melbourne, there was a production of Pala,
Okay.
an English production of Pala. So they did that. I'm not in conversation with any Australian companies right now, but every 2 or 3 years, there's one company
Something
which does
comes
something.
up.
So yeah.
All right. It would be wonderful to see more of your work here, and I wish you all the best. And I hope that I personally get to catch one of these plays somewhere. But until then, and hopefully I'll see you when I come to India, if you're in India
Yeah,
at the time.
yeah,
And thank you so much for your time.
absolutely. Thank you so much. I'll see you soon. Bye.